On October 27, 2023, former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang was officially announced to have suddenly passed away in Shanghai at the age of 68. The news quickly triggered an outpouring of public opinion in China and abroad, with various speculations and rumors rising amidst a wave of disbelief and suspicion. This is the official statement.
中国共产党第17届、18届、19届中央政治局常委、国务院原总理李克强同志近日在上海休息。2023年10月26日因突发心脏病，经全力抢救无效，于10月27日0时10分在上海逝世，享年68岁，讣告后发。
The circumstances of this former premier's passing are full of suspicions. The three main ones are as follows. First, Li Keqiang is probably the shortest-lived premier of the CCP. He was the youngest state-level leader to pass away. No high-ranking official at this level has ever passed away at the age of 68 before. Retired leaders of the CCP are among the healthiest and longest-lived in the world. Each one has his or her own medical team that takes close care of them 24 hours a day. Li Keqiang was last seen visiting the Mogao Grottos at the end of August 2023. At that time, he appeared in pretty good shape. It's actually not easy for a national leader at this level to die suddenly. A number of medical professionals said that the popularity of cardiac computed tomography in the last decade has made it easy to know if there is any narrowing of the coronary arteries, which can be treated in advance. It's odd that Li Keqiang died of a so-called heart attack after a so-called exhaustive resuscitation. I was really surprised. Li Keqiang in recent years looked well, then suddenly, it's pretty shocking. Second, according to the information disclosed so far, Li Keqiang suffered a heart attack close to noon on October 26th and was sent to Shanghai Shuguang Hospital for resuscitation. It's a second-rate hospital in Shanghai. The top hospital in Shanghai for cardiovascular disease resuscitation and treatment is Zhongshan Hospital, ranking among the top 3 hospitals in China with a resuscitation success rate of 96%. There are also 2 other hospitals that are very good at this. The expertise of Shuguang Hospital are preventative healthcare and respiratory medicine, not cardiovascular medicine. The critical resuscitation time for acute myocardial infarction is within 120 minutes. The map shows that it takes about 13 minutes to reach Shuguang Hospital by car from the Dongjiao Hotel where Li Keqiang stayed, and there were 3 routes to the top-rated Zhongshan Hospital, with the furthest arriving in 30 minutes and the nearest arriving in 23 minutes. Then why did they send Li Keqiang to a second-rate hospital instead of sending him to a top hospital for resuscitation? If Shuguang Hospital saves more than 10 minutes, then according to the usual practice, the officials would have arranged specialists to be on site. As a matter of fact, the experts were on site, but they arrived in the afternoon, several hours later, missing the crucial resuscitation time of 120 minutes. The question that naturally arises is why did the specialists arrive late? Some sources also claim that Li suffered a heart attack in the evening. Regardless of whether Li Keqiang's attack occurred at noon or in the evening, if he died in the early hours of October 27th, it means there should have been sufficient resuscitation time, at least 6 hours before his death. So, why was he not revived? Third, on the day that the party media announced Li's death, a video recording was circulated on the internet. It showed that a search on the CCP mouthpiece Xinhua.com with the keyword obituary brought up a shocking search result. One return result reads, Obituary of Comrade Li Keqiang, Obituary of the Communist Party of China CPC Central Committee, NPC Standing Committee, State Council, and the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference CPPCC. The page shows that this notice was published on February 3, 2023 at 16:51:30. The page shows that the source of the article is Xinhua News Agency, but the main text only contains a long list of the word test. Could it be that someone inside the CCP has long wanted to get rid of Li and did a test run? Even ordinary members of the public have inadvertently revealed their doubts. This member of the public said he wanted to see how the memorial service for Premier Li would be organized. The implication is that more connotations can be deduced from the subsequent arrangements made by the senior level of the CCP. My heart is very sad. He was still very young. His passing is just like Yang Xiang, the previous mayor of Shanghai. All of a sudden, it's also a heart attack. He, Li Keqiang, was in Shanghai resting and recuperating. But actually, he was recovering from an illness. Shanghai has big hospitals, and we're definitely taking care of him. Really, it's too painful, too painful. In the next few days, we will see what his memorial service is like. Following Li Keqiang's passing, all sorts of conspiracy theories have pointed at party leader Xi Jinping being the perpetrator. We will analyze this theory in the second half of the episode. Let's first take a look at 3 statements made by Li Keqiang that have been widely circulated among Chinese people both in and out of China. The first one is that in May 2020, at the 2 sessions of the CCP, Li said, "There are 600 million people in China who earn just 1,000 yuan or $136 a month."
中国是一个人口众多的发展中国家，我们人均年收入的平均水平是3万元人民币，但是有6亿人每个月的收入也就是1000元，1000元，在一个中等城市可能租房都困难。现在又碰到疫情，疫情后啊，可以说民生危要。怎么样保障那些困难的群众和经过疫情发生新的困难群众的基本民生，这应该是我们放在极为重要的位置上。
This is a public secret that Li Keqiang, in his capacity as premier and a member of the Red System, chose to say, thus acknowledging it. It's rather unusual, as Xi just announced not long ago that China had achieved building a Shaokong society, or a moderately prosperous society, in all respects. Some people therefore believe that Li cared more about ordinary people compared to many other senior CCP officials.
I think during Li Keqiang's time as premier, he primarily came across as the economic moderate who, after having served in some of the more economically middling or challenged provinces, people like Liaoning and Henan, for example, he has this concern for the average man, if you will, or that he's always seemed to be having concern for the economic blue collars in mind as he go about economic policy making. And that is why also I think in terms of policy making, he tends to be, generally speaking, more of an advocate for downward redistribution of policy. He also tends to be interested in creating more space for the grassroots to pursue economic opportunities.
I feel very sorry. I saw the news on Baidu when I was in class today, and then I was very sad, because after all, he, Li Keqiang, was quite young. I felt that the country had just lost an excellent leader, and then I was very sad, including my family. In my family WeChat group, my mother and father also feel very sad. They also really like this leader. The second statement is that Li said on different occasions in 2022 that the CCP's insistence on reform and opening up was like the Yellow River and Yangtze River will never flow backwards.
我明确地告诉大家，无论国际风云如何变幻，中国都会坚定不移地扩大开放。长江黄河不会倒流，中国对外开放40多年，发展了自己，造福了人民。也有利于世界，这是个机遇的大门，我们绝不会，也绝不能 把它关上。
These words resonate widely with the public as the CCP authorities are speeding up the reversal of history. Many Chinese people are now spontaneously mourning Li Keqiang, so to speak, in memory of an era that cannot be brought back.
If we go back 10 years ago, when Premier Li Keqiang first came to power, we were talking about this notion of Xi-Li era, when the General Secretary and the Premier both yield significant power. However, in the last few years, increasingly, we're only talking about Xi Jinping, and certainly we see that reflected in media discourse as well when they talk about the Xi Jinping new era.
The third statement is at the end of February 2023, when Li Keqiang was about to leave his post. He exclaimed unexpectedly, "People do their work while the heavens are watching. It seems the heavens are discerning."
上处冬季，但今天啊，是阳光明媚，如沐春风，春光。人们常说，人在干，天在看，看来是苍天有眼啊，看着我们国办同志这些年来辛辛苦苦、扎扎实实做出的特殊的奉献，应该给你们奖赏。你看，这个话已经呼风了。
In traditional Chinese culture, people respect the heavens and believe in the divine. The CCP's mentality is to fight against heaven and earth and to preach atheism. It's surprising that the Chinese premier suddenly made a remark that was so inconsistent with the party's ideology. Perhaps Li had suffered too much under the powerful party leader Xi Jinping. On the verge of leaving office, he couldn't help but seek justice from heaven. So, after the reform and opening up in 1978, he should be considered one of the weakest premiers. In a strict sense, if we look at the structure, he is no longer the second in command. He's just working under the number one, handling specific tasks, and playing a somewhat subordinate role. In our opinion, the wide circulation of these three statements doesn't stem from how great Li was. The fact that Li was able to climb up the ladder step by step to become the premier shows that to a large extent his party's spirit was superb, and he was able to maintain a high degree of consistency with the Central Committee of the Communist Party, especially when it came to major political issues. In reality, Li Keqiang had no dazzling political achievements. Especially as the premier of the past decade and China's economic manager, he watched the economy slide into the abyss of recession, doing little to stop it. Yet, the responsibility for China's economy getting to this state doesn't lie entirely with Li. It has to do with the CCP regime, especially with the nearly 3 decades of de facto rule by former party leader Jiang Zemin, which planted numerous mines for China's economy, and with the direction of the incumbent party leader Xi Jinping, who wants to preserve the Communist Party. Xi has put the survival of the party as his top priority as a way to preserve his power. As such, he is destined to fail to solve the systemic problems no matter how hard he tries. Instead, he has triggered the many economic bombs that were planted before. Li Keqiang is remembered by many ordinary Chinese, partially because what happened to him resonates with them. Born in Hefei, Anhui Province, Li Keqiang entered the law faculty of Peking University in the late 1970s, majoring in economics. At that time, Hu Jintao was the secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Youth League. Because of his acquaintance with Hu Jintao, the CCP leader preceding Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang entered the fast lane of politics. With an impressive academic background and fluent English, Li was once one of the most highly regarded figures in the Tuan faction or Communist Youth League faction. On November 15, 2012, Li Keqiang became China's premier. It was supposed to be the pinnacle of his political career as he co-ruled with the General Secretary of the CCP Central Committee, Xi Jinping, in what is known as the Xi-Li regime. Since the Jiang faction regarded Xi and Li as common enemies, it was once thought that the two were hardcore allies. However, as Xi Jinping gradually assumed the highest power, the differences between his and Li's governing philosophy began to emerge and became more obvious. In particular, in terms of economic policy, Xi tends to favor government-led enterprises, while Li Keqiang advocated a market-based economy and the reform of state-owned enterprises. Li Keqiang's 10 years as premier was a decade of depression and frustration. Let's take a look at a clip from a previous episode of our channel, which will help us figure out who had more incentive to see Li Keqiang perish. On October 22, 2022, at the close of the 20th Congress of the CCP, in an unprecedented move, former CCP leader Hu Jintao was persuaded to leave the venue ahead of time. But online footage showed otherwise. 79-year-old Hu Jintao sat next to Xi Jinping. Two attendants approached Hu, who looked a bit surprised. Upon their insistence, Hu stood up but seemed unwilling to leave. The two handlers appeared to be persuading him and made repeated gestures asking Hu to leave. Eventually, Hu left the podium, interacting with Xi briefly and then tapping Chinese Premier Li Keqiang on the shoulder as he was leaving. Hu looked unhappy throughout the entire process. The top Communist Party officials on the podium had mixed reactions. The senior official next to Hu took out a handkerchief to wipe his sweat. Li Keqiang seemed stunned, while Xi was indifferent throughout. Hu Jintao's forced departure from the meeting sparked much speculation. We suspect that it was due to an internal struggle within the top echelon of the CCP. There are two main factions within the CCP, those who follow Xi's directives and those who follow former party leader Jiang Zemin and his partner Zheng Qinghong, also known as the Jiang-Zheng faction. As Jiang is getting up in age, Zheng is now running the show. We call this faction the Jiang faction. In addition to these two, there was another group called the League faction, the Communist Youth League faction, which was started by Hu Jintao and is relatively weak. Hu served as the CCP top leader from 2002 to 2012 after Jiang Zemin. The current representatives of this faction are Premier Li Keqiang, former Politburo Standing Committee member Wang Yang, and Hu Chunhua, who is seen as Hu's desired successor in the next generation. According to common logic, Xi's camp needs to unite with the middle figures, including the League faction, in order to defeat Jiang's faction. But the results of this meeting show that Xi has ditched the League faction. One possibility is that Xi thought that even if he united with the relatively weak League group, it still wouldn't give him the strength to squeeze out figures from Jiang's faction. It might as well get rid of the League faction to ensure his re-election goes smoothly, and to exchange for a majority in the second tier, the Politburo Standing Committee seats. Another possibility is that Xi has fallen prey to Jiang's stratagems of alienation. Both of these factors may have played their influence. In reality, Xi's greatest enemy is Jiang's faction. The reason senior officials of Jiang's faction won't give up their bid for supremacy even after retirement is that they have too much blood on their hands and fear being held accountable once losing power. They don't trust party leaders and senior officials who aren't tied to their own blood debts. Since 2012, when Xi came to power, the Jiang faction has been wooing the middle figures while using alienation tactics to make Xi ditch his strong political ally, Wang Keqiang, while suspecting the League faction at the same time. Wang is a CCP princeling, the main force in the anti-corruption campaign that has helped Xi amass his power. Why is Jiang's alienation tactic so effective? It's because during the 23 years that the Jiang faction was in power, they developed a large and intertwined system of officials and an amazing internal and external propaganda system. To this day, the Jiang faction has a powerful propaganda channel to disseminate all kinds of information. This was the scene at this year's 2 sessions of the CCP when Li Keqiang stepped down as premier.
After the opening session of the NPC was over, Xi Jinping approached Li Keqiang and gave him a handshake, but he didn't look at Li squarely when shaking hands. He just put his hand out and immediately turned his face to the side, nodding to greet others. Li Keqiang has been the premier since March 2013, partnering with Xi Jinping for 10 years. The 10 years of cooperation is over like this in less than 10 seconds.
Li's life has illustrated how a talented former Peking University scholar was stifled to the extreme within the present CCP system, repeatedly humiliated, and finally perished suddenly and suspiciously. In 1982, after his graduation from university, Li left a remark on a classmate's yearbook. It read, "Being innocent but not lacking in wisdom, being kind but not losing one's strength, lifting one's life high above the mundane and dissolving it into society should be the common pursuit of our generation." Such a spirit, like many young Chinese of that generation, entered society and the future with a desire for a better life. But the red iron fist dealt them numerous blows. In the end, many middle-aged people lamented that they had become the kind of people they once hated the most. Conscience is incompatible with the communist system. Since it's incompatible, they have to adapt to it and even take the lead to become part of it and go through life with split personalities. Many Chinese mourn Li Keqiang, perhaps in pity for what happened to him, but also for what happened to themselves. What most people felt or reflected upon was that the current system was becoming more like Mao Zedong's system, party-led with less room for discussion and very strict control over public opinion. This reaction was a response to dissatisfaction with the current situation.
Very sad. He's only 68 years old. We're all in our 70s. He probably hasn't enjoyed his life yet, right? He has been busy all the time taking care of the country's important responsibilities. He had just taken a break and then became ill and then passed away. We're very sad.
Li Keqiang's former residence in Anhui province is surrounded by a sea of flowers. Due to the strict control by the CCP authorities, there has been no large-scale memorial activities in Beijing. Only at Peking University, where Li graduated from, flowers and cards are seen online. On October 29th, the source told overseas Chinese media that Beijing is now basically under semi-martial law, except that it isn't announced. A large number of armed police officers from around Hebei province have been deployed to Beijing. So if Li Keqiang was murdered, who is the most likely offender? We believe that Xi Jinping, no matter how lacking in political wisdom he is, should be unlikely to resort to such tactics. Having Li Keqiang vanish doesn't seem to be much of a benefit to him. Thus, there is no need for Xi to make such a move. As the Tuan faction has been annihilated and Li is retired from politics, objectively speaking, Li isn't much of a threat. The video clip at the CCP's 20th Congress shows that Li Keqiang appeared to be very cautious and even a bit timid at the moment when his boss Hu Jintao was being escorted out of the venue of the 20th National People's Congress. On the other hand, she has been fighting with Jiang for more than a decade, and the Xi-Jiang fight does exist. And after Jiang Zemin's death, the Xi-Jiang fight is still going on. Even in this case, Xi hasn't been seen to use tactics such as assassinating his greatest political rival, Zhen Qinghong. In the past few years, in the Chinese media controlled by the Jiang faction overseas, topics such as Xi and Li don't get along and Xi Jinping should be replaced by Li Keqiang have been heatedly speculated by the Jiang faction. In fact, the aim is to drive a wedge between Xi and Li. Another point of concern is that Li Keqiang died suddenly in Shanghai, which is the stronghold of the Jiang faction. It is possible and technically feasible to induce a sudden heart attack by poisoning. It should be known that Xi, in order to prevent Jiang from poisoning, brings his own dishes and teacup with him when he goes out and travels abroad. It's because he knows that his political opponents who are known for scheming are very good at assassination. Therefore, a simple observation is, what good will the removal of Li Keqiang do to Xi? What good will it do to the Jiang faction, which is anti-Xi? If one considers the situation from this angle, one can draw a logical conclusion. However, despite the many possibilities for the cause of Li's death, the masses prefer to believe that Xi is the mastermind behind Li's death. It's enough to prove that she has already fallen into the Tacitus trap. The Tacitus trap describes a situation where an unpopular government is hated no matter what it does and whether it is right or wrong. In 2014, she defined the Tacitus trap in his public speech as when public power loses credibility. No matter what words are published, no matter what is done, the society will give a negative evaluation. Why is she caught in the Tacitus trap? It is because she is defending the Communist Party. Countless people who have tasted the iron fist of the CCP are full of anger and have no place to vent it, so Xi Jinping, the party defender, will naturally become a target for people to vent their anger. The only question that remains is whether she, who has been caught in the Tacitus trap, is willing to continue to bear and inherit the century-old sins and debts of the CCP.